If my voice is a little lower this morning, believe me, it sounds better today than it did a couple of days ago. So please bear with me if you would. I especially want to welcome those of you who are guests today, friends of members of this congregation. And I can tell you that in the time that I've been here, these good folks at Fifth Avenue Baptist are wonderful friends. So thank you for coming today, for accepting the invitation, and we hope that you will come back and worship with us again whenever you have an opportunity. I will tell you that one of my friends of 30 years is being honored today back at my home church in Lexington, the Calvary Baptist Church. Her name is the Reverend Carrie Beth Tonks. She has been and continues to be our minister to children and young families. She's done that effectively for 30 years. She undoubtedly is one of the most effective ministers that I have ever met. And on this Friend Day, I want to commend her to you because of her example, but especially to our folks back home. In the 15th chapter of John's Gospel, we find these words. This is the part of John's Gospel, it's called the Farewell Discourses, where Jesus is preparing his disciples for the upcoming time, soon to be upcoming time, when they will be asked to minister without his physical presence. He will still be with them in spirit, but his physical presence would have already ascended to heaven. So he is using these farewell discourses to get his disciples ready, not to stop ministry, but to continue ministry. Here's what he said to disciples back then. Here's what he is saying to those of us, his disciples today. This is my commandment, Jesus said, that you love one another as I have loved you. That you also love one another. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for his friends. And you are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because a servant does not know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you, in order to be my friends, will love one another. I've shared with you in a column this week the original inspiration for today's sermon. I was eating lunch in a Chinese restaurant. And to be quite honest with you, I'll take sermon ideas and inspirations from about any place I can get them after many, many, many years of preaching. But no, this doesn't come from the fortune cookie proverb. It doesn't come, from the Mugu Gai Pan. It doesn't come from the chicken fried rice, all of which were good. But it comes from a conversation that I had that day with a friend. Bill Roberts, good friend of mine, took me to lunch that day because Bill deemed himself the unofficial ad hoc chairman of the unofficial ad hoc committee, whose unofficial ad hoc purpose was to be sure that Robert Baker took off every now and then and took care of himself. And sometimes Bill would play that out on the golf course. Sometimes he would do it on the racquetball court, and he smeared me. He made me feel worse after I played racquetball with him because he would always win, and sometimes it was at lunch, so we're at lunch. And my friend has a conversation that day, and you must understand that he can be my friend in a special way because he's a PK. He's a preacher's kid. He lived this stuff. He knows about the pressures and the joys and the challenges that take place in a minister's life. So Bill Again, the unofficial ad hoc chairman of this committee, to tell me to take better care of myself, engages me in conversation. And that day, the conversation went something like this. Bill decided to tell me about a time, years previously, when our church, the Calvary Baptist Church, did not have a minister. They were in, can you believe it, an interim period. Bill was a deacon. They had deacons there at Calvary. We still do. He was asked to do the devotion at one of the deacons' meetings. And he said, Bob, I want to tell you a little bit about that devotion. Just a little bit. We talked about the importance of nurturing friendships and nurturing relationships and being connected in such a way that we will continue to be the church during this interim time, and that by being connected to one another, we would be even more effective when a new pastor came. So I looked at the deacon body that night, Bob, and I challenged them to be friends, as Jesus called us to be friends. And this is what I told them. If you really want to be a friend of Jesus, you need to bury a hatchet, you need to build a bridge, and you need to shine a light. Now, unfortunately, he didn't tell me the rest of that, but I thought about that for just a moment. Bury a hatchet, build a bridge, shine a light. 3 points. Concise, catchy. And the minister part of my brain is thinking almost out loud, sermon outline, sermon outline. I didn't say it out loud, but Bill kind of knew I was thinking, and he smiled too. What does it mean for us to be friends with one another and friends with Jesus? And Bill simply said, here's the outline. If you ever decide to do something with it, bury a hatchet, build a bridge, shine a light. So let's explore that friendship formula for just a few moments this morning when we've talked about friends. Bury a hatchet. Haven't you heard that phrase about all your life? Is there anybody out there that hasn't heard the phrase, bury a hatchet? Well, a few. Most of us have. But I didn't really ever pay too much attention to it about its origin until later, after that conversation with Bill Roberts. I decided to do some exploring, and I found out that the origin of this phrase goes back to pre-colonial days in our country, in the northeastern part of what is now the United States, when a peace settlement would occur between the Native Americans, who were called Indians back then, and the white men who had come over from Europe. When they made peace or agreed to live in harmony, what was most important to them was this ceremony. In the year 1680, Samuel Sewall wrote about this custom as follows. Meeting with the Sakim Indian chiefs, they came to an agreement and buried 2 axes in the ground, which ceremony to them is more important than all the paper and articles that they signed, the hatchet being the principal weapon. About the year 1790, the phrase bury the hatchet became anglicized, and it was a routine part of the English language, and according to the Dictionary of American Idioms, it meant to settle quarrel, make peace, become friends again. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. They came to an agreement and buried 2 axes in the ground, the hatchet being the principal weapon. They buried the principal weapon, which was preventing or at least testing their friendship. Could it be that you and I who are here this morning, even on this Friend Day, could learn something from those original Native Americans? Are there people in our lives with whom we need to come to an agreement this morning? Are there some hatchets that need to be buried this morning? Are there some weapons which are preventing or at least testing friendships this morning? Now, in a literal sense, I've never really buried a hatchet, though my wife went to an event a couple of times this summer with a group of teachers, and they were trying to throw a hatchet. Have any of you been to one of those things? I've never quite understood those, because they want you to go there and eat a bunch of food and drink a bunch of beverages, which I think is kind of crazy if you're going to throw a hatchet. And so Deborah, without food, without beverages, was trying to throw a hatchet. She never could get it stuck to the wall. She was not a hatchet thrower, but she was a hatchet barrier as far as her life is concerned. Are there some hatchets, some weapons that you might need to bury this morning? Like jealousy, or selfishness, or gossip, or pride, or blame? Blame. It's one of the most powerful weapons which threaten or can prevent friendships. It certainly is one of the major weapons which we can hurl at other people. And it all too easily strains relationships and existing potential friendships. What about you? Do you ever find yourself hurling a hatchet of blame at an unsuspecting or innocent party? Do you ever use the weapon of blame? Many of you have heard of Sue Monk Kidd, who before she really became popular worldwide as a writer, wrote for Daily Guideposts, a devotional that I have used for years. And in one of those Daily Guidepost articles, she told about the time that she went to the beach and she saw two boys constructing several sand castles. And she thought that was nice. They were playing very well together. But suddenly, one of the boys' sandcastles, one of his creations, completely crumbled. "Look what you did," he said to the other kid. "Me," the other kid cried. "I barely touched it. You're just blaming me because you did such a crummy job building." And then she wrote, "Have you ever noticed that when a person doesn't want to deal with whatever is objectionable in herself or himself, she projects it onto someone else and attacks that person instead?" Well, have you ever noticed that when we are dissatisfied, we tend to blame such dissatisfaction on other people, even on other people that we value as friends? Blaming other people is something that takes place. Sometimes we'll blame our spouse. This happens in marriage. Not in your all's marriages. I know this never happens in Huntington. It happened a few times in Kentucky, so let me just delve into it just a little bit more. Our marriage partners are the easiest targets for any kind of vague dissatisfaction that we might have. Not you all, but all those other people out there. Marriage was never meant to be the antidote to all personal difficulties or dissatisfactions, yet for most of us, it assumes that position. Even though we know better, we continue to blame our mates for our own problems. If we are depressed, it's their fault. If we had a bad day at the office, it's their fault. If we are spending too much money, it's their fault. If our love life is lousy, it's their fault. If the marriage isn't more enjoyable, alive, and vibrant, it's their fault too. And the truth is, it's a whole lot easier to blame somebody else for something that's not quite right than it is for us to look into the mirror and understand that sometimes the problem is us. Do you ever hurl a hatchet of blame? Well, maybe it's not your marriage. Maybe it's your in-laws, or maybe it's your son or daughter, or a colleague at work, or somebody at school, or a member of the church, or a neighbor down the street. Maybe it's one or more of these people whom you've targeted with the hatchet of blame. But a hatchet thrower Jesus never was. A hatchet barrier he was indeed. Do you want to have a friend relationship with Jesus? Do you want to be the type of friend that he's calling you, me, all of us to be? Then dare to do something that is kind of difficult at times. Bury a hatchet. I'm going to stop for just a minute and not bury a hatchet, but take a drink of water. Hold on to that first point, if you would. I'm sure that sounded good, but here we go. Bury a hatchet, build a bridge. I wouldn't make it up here on the weekends if it weren't for a bridge between Ashland and Huntington. And there are several bridges, and I'll confess to you that sometimes I've gotten on the wrong one. And one day I was coming up for a staff meeting, I ended up in Ohio. I took the wrong turn. But most of us depend on bridges, and we don't even think about it. We're bridge users. A bridge helps us to get from one place to another. It helps us to overcome barriers. Oftentimes, a bridge will show us a more favorable way. So we're not asked to be bridge users, though we are the users. And we don't really have to build a bridge as far as concrete and steel, unless you happen to be a contractor or an engineer. But there are some bridges I think that you all and I and all of us could build. Oscar Thompson, in heaven now, was an evangelism professor at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, Fort Worth, Texas. And in his book, Concentric Circles of Concern, he said, "What is building bridges? It is simply meeting needs in a person's life. Just a gentle touch, just a smile, just a note, just a call. Just show me a friend of God, and I will show you someone who is always loving and meeting needs." So think about the people in your world for just a minute or two. Are there some people that need to have bridges built? Think about the people in your own personal world for just a moment. This is the people in the home where you live, the office where you work, the school that you attend, neighborhood where you reside, people in the church where you worship. In your own personal world, the people that you see every week, maybe even every day, are people with all kinds of needs. And as Oscar Thompson said, what is building bridges? It's meeting people's needs. See, there's some people in your personal world who are lonely. They need to know that somebody cares about them. Could you be that someone? To give them a call, write them a note, pay them a visit. Will you build a bridge? There are people who have been devastated by loss. They've lost a parent, they've lost a spouse, they've lost a job. They've lost a home. They've lost a marriage. And they desperately need someone to talk with, someone who will listen to them, someone to cry with, someone to be there. Hey, could you be that someone? Would you build a bridge? There are people who, with their lives, are headed the wrong way. They need someone to provide them with a better way, someone to model for them something more positive. Could that someone be you? Would you build a bridge? There are people who have messed up, made mistakes, really blown it in certain situations. They need a second chance. They don't deserve it, but they still need one. Would you dare to forgive them? A second chance resolve to give them help meet their forgiveness needs? Could you build a bridge? A friend really is willing to build bridges. What is building bridges? It is meeting people's needs. You want to be the type of friend that Jesus calls us to be? Bury a hatchet. Build a bridge. Shine a light. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. But then he looked at his disciples, his followers, us, and said, you're the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they will see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. He's the light of the world and calls us to be the lights of our world. When I was a student at Georgetown College, that was several years back, I was a member of an independent fraternity President's House Association, the PHA. And each year the PHA voted in new members. We had an annual voting meeting. And we had always several wonderful candidates to consider, good athletes, good academicians, good all-around people. I remember all of our annual meetings when we voted, because sometimes we would end up staying up all night because we took this seriously. We discussed confidentially, these folks, would they be good fits for the House? One particular voting meeting I will never forget, and neither will my PHA brothers. One of the candidates was a guy named Rod. And Rod was popular on campus. He was a good musician. He was a good student. He would fit in just right, all of us thought, with the PHA. All of us except Jim. Jim and Rod didn't like each other. In fact, they were pretty close to detesting each other. Something about a girl they both had dated once upon a time. And all of us knew, because, you see, it took a unanimous vote for everybody present to get in the House. And even though most all of us wanted Rod to be a PHA brother, we knew that that wasn't going to happen. So the night of the voting meeting came. We finally got around to Rod. Everybody said positive things. He'll be such a good member for us. But we knew that Jim wasn't going to vote for him. Something kind of strange happened. Right before we took the final vote on Rod, Jim excused himself and left the room. He couldn't bring himself to vote for Rod, but he respected the wishes and desires of the rest of his brothers to let Rod in. Well, Rod became a wonderful PHA member, but he and Jim were anything but brothers. They'd seldom speak to each other. They carried grudges against each other. There was a lot of tension in the house. One week at weekly devotions, one of our brothers, Jack Knespel, who became a Methodist minister, gave the devotion on Jesus Christ being the light of the world. And then he said to all of us, you're to be lights of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they might see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And as he ended his devotion, he gathered all of us in a circle in our recreation room. All the lights were dimmed. He gave all of us an unlit candle. And Jack took his candle. It was lit. And he said, in just a few moments, I'm going to go to one of you and light your candle. And I want that process to continue throughout the circle. So Jack went over to someone and said, Jesus Christ is the light of the world. You are the light of the world, Bob. Let your light shine. Pass it on. And then I took my lit candle and went over to someone else. Maybe it was Greg. Greg, Jesus Christ is the light of the world. You are the light of the world, Greg. Let your light shine. Pass it on. Well, that continued for a good while. Someone went over to Jim and said, Jim, you're the light of the world. Let your light shine. Pass it on. And then, to the amazement of everybody in that room, Jim took his lit candle and went across the circle and stood in front of Rod. Rod, he said, we certainly have had our differences. But Rod, Jesus Christ calls us to be the light of the world. You are the light of the world, Rod. Let your light shine. Pass it on. There were tears that were glistening in eyes that evening. It really had been an example, an experience which those of us present have never forgotten to this day. The day when we gathered in that circle. That day when we heard about Christ being the light of the world and we were to be the light of the world too. A day when we, in an incredible way, experienced God's forgiveness and goodness and grace. All because Jim, in that moment which had to be holy, buried a hatchet, built a bridge, and he shined a light. Shall we pray? Dear God, just because you call us to be friends doesn't mean it's always easy. It couldn't have been easy, God, for you to be a friend to all of the world because of the way that you were often treated. But on this Friend Day, when we rejoice in the relationships that you have brought into our lives, we ask, oh God, to help us to be friends. And we ask this in the name of the ultimate friend, Christ Jesus. Amen.